Yo, welcome to another video by Imagi Fantasy Football. Today we're going to be talking to you guys about 5 players who we think will be busts and not live up to their ADP this season in fantasy football. We each named one player, and Dant's going to get us started with his bust for this year.
All right, so my bust is Adam Thielen. He has a current ADP of 48, which is the wide receiver 19. And he finished last year as a wide receiver 10 with fantasy points per game of almost 17. He had receiving stats, as you can see on the screen, and he had a 19% touchdown rate on receptions. And his advanced stats are he scored 72% of his total points in all of last season in less than half the games he played. And these came against defenses such as Houston, Jacksonville, and Dallas, which were historically bad defenses. He also finished outside the top 30 in the yards per target stat, yards per reception, and the yards after catch and average target distance. So this is a guy who he's going to lose a lot of targets this year because we have a full 17 game slate from Justin Jefferson. So he's not explosive enough to give you a lot of yards, and he's going to lose targets, and he can't keep up the 20% touchdown rate on reception. It's just something that most receivers are not going to be able to do. It's kind of like a fluke season for him last year. Other than that, in weeks 14 to 17 last year, Justin Jefferson out-targeted him 41-21. So with a full 17 games of Jefferson, who actually broke out in week 6 of last year, he's going to see less targets, less receptions, and probably less touchdowns. Adam Thielen is going to be 31 years of age to start the season. And with the Vikings are probably going to move to Jefferson and Dalvin as the center point of this offense, leading to, again, Adam Thielen being a bust at ADP of 48. At the end of the 5th round, his draft capital is way too high when you can get guys like an elite QB and Lamar or Kyler, or even one of the Rams wide receivers.
Just something I wanted to add. Like Kirk Cousins last year, he had a phenomenal year, like 4,600 passing yards, 35 touchdowns. And you have to assume that they're going to try and run the ball more, especially in a Kubiak-led offense. So I think not only will like the passing volume go down, that's going to have a huge impact on Adam Thielen's stats. And his yards might go down even more. And if he doesn't score as much as he did last year, which is probably unlikely, he's going to be a bust at his current ADP. So yeah, I agree with that selection.
Okay, so for my player, I thought Tyler Lockett was very likely to bust. So he's currently being drafted around 56, which is wide receiver 22. And as you see below, his stats last year were pretty good, but what often goes unseen is that almost half of those points that he had last year came in just 3 games. So he was very boom or bust last year. He even had 9 out of his 10 touchdowns in just 4 of the games played last year. And 9 of his finishes of the 16 games came outside the top 40, not top 30, not top 20, top 40, which shows how bad he really was in some of those games. And, he did have some good games with scoring 50 points and 37 points, but it's not worth it to draft a guy this high just for him to finish outside the top 40, which is below a flex most weeks of the season. And to add on to this, the Seahawks recently parted ways with their offensive coordinator from last year because they want to run the ball more, which is Pete Carroll's he likes to do that. And so with more emphasis on the running game as well, Lockett again is going to see less targets. And so Lockett feels more as a surefire flex or even a bench player this year rather than a wide receiver 2, which is right where he's being drafted right now.
Just something else I just wanted to say. Tyler Lockett, he's like, there's boomer bust and then there's like Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett takes everything to the extreme. Like his boom weeks are extremely good, like 30 plus points. He had a game with over 50 points last year. I remember it was crazy. But his bust weeks could like tank your team. So if that's like something you're like interested in, you want to have like a boomer bust type player in your flex spot, I could actually understand wanting to do that because that could like win you a week. And that technically won't lose you a week. So right now, at his price is wide receiver 22. I don't think his price is honestly all that high for what he could provide to your team potentially. But I could also see him like totally busting because of this new Seahawks offense.
Okay, so the bust I chose to cover in this video is DeAndre Swift. I just want to make it clear first, it's not a knock on Swift really or his talent. I think he's extremely talented. I think he's a great player, but it's rather just because of the system that Swift's going to be playing in this year. So um, Anthony Lynn, who's the Lions' new offensive coordinator, he's known for using two running backs. As we saw in with the Chargers, he had Gordon and Eckler, and then last year Eckler and Joshua Kelly. And now this year, he's already brought in Jamal Williams to handle some of the work with Swift, but also he's already referred to Jamal Williams as a guy who he loves and considers to be a true A-back, which he defined as a guy who can play all three downs, can block, can receive, can run the ball well. So already, I don't think Swift's going to get nearly the workload that we might have expected coming out of last season. I think it's going to be pretty close to a 50-50 split, maybe a 55-45, which not to say Swift won't be the starter, but he's not going to be getting the type of workload we want to see from a guy being drafted as the RB16 on average. He seems to be due for some touchdown regression. He had a 7% touchdown rate on his carries last year, which that's bound to go down. He had, I think, 8 rushing touchdowns. Yeah, on only 114 carries. It's too hard to sustain. Also with Williams, he's a much bigger back than Swift, so he could also lose out on a lot of goal line opportunities from Williams. And Williams, as we know, what we saw in Detroit, what we saw in Green Bay, he's a great blocker, great receiver. So Swift could also lose down on some very valuable third down work, which receptions and yards, as you can see on screen. His receiving is where he really did a lot of damage last year. So I think Swift just because of the system he's in, he's just bound not to live up to expectations. The Lions offense, as we know too, losing Stafford, losing so many wide receivers, Galladay, Marvin Jones, just not going to be a very good offense this year. So yeah, I just don't see Swift living up to expectations this year. I think he's definitely going to be a bust. At his current price of running back 16, I'd avoid him. I'd draft guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, J.K. Dobbins over him. I think he's not going to have a great season this year.
Yeah, and another thing to add is you're talking about Anthony Lynn and the whole Jamal Williams situation. Like Anthony Lynn coming over from San Diego or Los Angeles now. The Chargers often did run like running back by committee, so it's easy to see how Swift could easily lose out on some carries to Jamal Williams.
Mm-hmm. Well, the player that I chose as a bust was Josh Jacobs. And like Josh Jacobs, where do we even start with Josh Jacobs? There's so many things wrong with this guy. I mean, first off, let's start with his O-line. His O-line has just completely been decimated. Rodney Hudson left. Trent Brown gone. Dave Jackson gone. And they've been replaced by literally nobodies. They drafted Alex Leatherwood in the first round, and that's pretty much the consensus reach of the first round of the draft. So their offensive line is just falling. It's falling apart. I don't know what's going on Las Vegas anymore. And then there's been reports that Alex Leatherwood isn't even NFL ready yet he was going in like the middle of the first round. I don't think he can replace what Trent Brown had, even though Trent Brown didn't play much last year. It's just, I don't know. That offensive line is not that good this year. And then the other major thing, Kenyon Drake signed with the Las Vegas Raiders this past offseason, and that's going to be a huge detriment to Josh Jacobs' workload. First off, like the only reason that Josh Jacobs has been good these past 2 years is because of his volume. He's gotten just an exorbitant amount of volume. He's gotten nearly 300 carries. He's been getting some receiving work, not a lot of receiving work, but he's been getting a little bit. And Kenyon Drake is going to eat into that a lot. He's going to easily just take over the entire pass-catching role. Josh Jacobs might be limited to under 20 receptions this year, and that's going to hurt him a lot, especially in half-point or full-point PPR formats. But not only that, Kenyon Drake actually led the league in goal line opportunities last year. So if you think that Josh Jacobs is going to be the only goal line back in Las Vegas, that's just wrong. Kenyon Drake is going to take a lot of work from him there, and that's going to hurt his fantasy value even more, which was already predicated only on volume. So I don't even know where to go from there. The grand scheme of things, he wasn't even that good for fantasy. Sure, he was the running back 8 last year, but majority of his points, they came off of touchdowns. His receiving work was limited. His rushing yards, he wasn't even that good. He had 16 goal line carries, which was 3rd in the NFL. And then he wasn't very efficient with his work. He had 4.3 yards per touch, which ranked 56th, as you can see in the advanced stats. And he had a 3.9 yards per carry, which was one of the worst as for starting running backs. Then adding on to that, he's not an athletic freak. If you look at his workout metrics, they're all below average. So he's not some super talented running back that can get by just based on talent, like a Saquon Barkley, Nick Chubb, those kind of guys. He needs volume, and that volume just isn't going to be there this year. And then just like the end of it, he's going to be a matchup dependent, volatile RB2. Yet he's being drafted ahead of guys like David Montgomery, Myles Gaskin, Chris Carson, and at around like pick 36 and around RB20. He's just not going to perform to that level this year. He's going to be inconsistent, and there's not someone you can pick as like your RB2 this year. Personally, I'd feel comfortable taking him around pick 50 to 55, but pick 36 is way too early. So I think this year Josh Jacobs is going to be a bust relative to his ADP.
I completely agree with this pick. As you can see by his advanced stats, he's just not like, he doesn't have the big playability. I mean, 4.3 yards per touch, which ranks 56, 3.3% breakaway run rate, which is 43rd. So even if he does get the carries, he can't make like big plays off of it. They just kept force feeding him carries the last 2 years. I mean, 3.9 yards per carry. That's also bad. So this year, even the targets aren't going up for him. His receiving work, he had 20 receptions in his first year, 33 receptions last year. Plus now Kenyon Drake comes into the picture. So it's all just going to be bad for Josh Jacobs. He's not a big play threat. He's not that efficient. He has no receiving work. So, yeah, I definitely see him as a bust.
So one last thing that I forgot to mention was his 0.73 fantasy points per opportunity, which ranked 96th. That is so unbelievably bad. There's 3 running backs on every single team. That's what 96 comes out to. 0.73 fantasy points per opportunity is unfathomably low. And if that's what he was averaging with the amount of volume that he got before, I don't even know what's going to happen with this worse offensive line. And with Kenyon Drake there, sure, he might have less work, so his efficiency might go up. But then you'll see a dip in his total stats. So any way you see it, Josh Jacobs this year, he's definitely going to be a bust, at least in my opinion.
All right, now moving on to our final bust of the day, J.K. Dobbins. Shree's going to give you his rundown on him.
Thank you, John. Like contrary to popular belief, I think J.K. Dobbins is going to be bust relative to his ADP, right? See, personally, I don't have a lot against J.K. Dobbins. I'm sure he's a great guy. I'm sure, he definitely, donates to the veterans and stuff like that, But this guy, he's definitely busting relative to his ADP. He's ranked, he's going to be the RB15 apparently this year, and he's being drafted around 27. And that certainly is just way too high in my opinion. Last season, he had a decent rushing attempt. Again, like the Ravens rushing game seemed a bit off towards the latter end of the season, but he had decent rushing and his receiving was just atrocious. No touchdown per receiving and just 120 yards in all the games. I completely don't like that in a PPR, especially when you want this guy to be your RB2. Well, those are not the worst stats. Some of you could say, oh, those are not the worst stats. There's worse running backs to have that stat. Let's take a gander here at those advanced stats, right? He has less than a 50% snap share, and he has a 38.9% opportunity share, right? And he has 24 targets. So if you want a PPR running back, you want that RB2 on your team to save you the game when maybe your RB1 is having a bad game, or maybe your quarterback or some other position on your team. If that person's having a bad game, J.K. Dobbins is not going to save your team. With 24 targets, he was the 51st in the league. If you want a good PPR running back too, you're going to need a receiving back. His lack of red zone touches and his drops too, really can't be trusting this guy now. And not only that, it's that with Gus Edwards just recently signed the 2-year, $10 million extension with the Ravens. And now Gus Edwards might take on a bigger role too with Mark Ingram gone. And you don't want that guy cutting in. One of the biggest thing about fantasy, the most fun I personally have in fantasy, is watching your guy play. And there's nothing more annoying than seeing the backup running back sneak in there and get a touchdown. That's what's going to happen if you draft J.K. Dobbins. You're going to see him on the 3-yard line. He's going to be ready to go in the end zone. He's not going to get in because he doesn't get that many opportunities. And you're going to see Gus Edwards, big body. They're going to throw him in there. He's going to get the touchdown. You're going to end up depressed and lose the game. It's baffling to me how he's drafted above CEH, Carson, Swift, and maybe even Gaskin. because all these guys have promising futures compared to J.K. Dobbins, who we don't even know. No receiving work. Ravens are still a run-heavy offense, but he's clearly not making a lot out of it. So I wouldn't draft him here at 27.
I have to disagree with you. Like there's a bit of stuff I have to point out here. First of all, he led the league in yards per carry. He had 6 yards per carry. That is great. That was the highest in the NFL. Not only that, but he didn't like take over like the starting job until like week 9. After week 9, he was basically in a lead RB2. He was great for your team. In week 17, he had a massive performance. Also, not only does he have like big play, like he's a big play threat. Also, he's good in the goal line. He was one of the most efficient goal line backs in the league last year after he became the starter. Gus Edwards didn't really get into the end zone as much as J.K. Dobbins did after J.K. Dobbins became the starter. And what I think is going to happen is it's going to be a continuation of what happened last year. At the end of last year, I think J.K. Dobbins, I don't really see any way that he busts.
So you're going to take him over Clyde Edwards-Helaire?
I mean, maybe not Clyde, but I definitely take him over guys like DeAndre Swift, Chris Carson, David Montgomery, those type of guys. And that's the range he's going in. So I definitely feel comfortable taking J.K. Dobbins there.
I'd just like to point out that if we look at offenses that have like running quarterbacks, like guys like Josh Allen come to mind, Kyler, Jalen Hurts, right? All the running backs that are tied to those teams are going much later in drafts, like Chase Edmonds, Miles Sanders is going later than J.K. Dobbins. Devin Singletary and Zach Moss are going in like the 10th round. So I think Lamar is the best running quarterback out of those other 3 that I mentioned. So he's going to be taking a lot of carries from J.K. Dobbins. He's going to be getting a lot of runs in the end zone. And on top of that, J.K. Dobbins is a horrible receiving back. Miles Sanders gets more receiving work than him. So I just don't think that especially at being drafted at the 27th pick, he's going to be worth it, especially with Lamar there. If he had maybe some receiving upside, I could see it happening. But he had 18 receptions last year.
He's not a horrible receiving back. It's just he didn't get the opportunity. And there's reports that he's going to get those opportunities. And also, it doesn't matter if, like, I guess it does actually matter that Lamar Jackson is the best running quarterback in the league. But the Ravens run the ball more than anyone in the league. They have, over 3,000 yards rushing the last 2 years? And Lamar's going to get, 1,100, maybe 1,200 of that? The rest of it is going to be distributed between like J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, those type of guys. And I think J.K. Dobbins could get a huge chunk of that. He could have an over like 1,300, 1,400 rushing yard season this year. And I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't bet an eye.
Well, you say like J.K. Dobbins is there's reports of him getting a better role. But on the other hand, you see all these reports of Lamar trying to throw more deep this year. Ravens working on deeper throws because Lamar was 19th in the league for deep passes. And they also signed Sammy Watkins, and they've been drafted Rashad Bateman, and can't see J.K. Dobbins just keep like if the Ravens rushing goes down, I don't know how you can see J.K. Dobbins' production going up, especially like Don mentioned, he's not the greatest receiving back.
He was a good RB2 last year during the second half of the year when he became the starter, and he's going to be the starter for the rest of this year. So barring injury, I really don't see how J.K. Dobbins busts. But that's just
I just can't justify picking a running back that's not. I mean, like people meme Lamar being a running back all the time, but he's actually like an insane runner. So I guess they could potentially rush for 3,000 yards again. I don't see that happening. I think Lamar is going to throw more this year and have 1,200 yards on the ground. So 27 is just too high for J.K. Dobbins.
I think Lamar is I think they're gonna try to throw more, but they're gonna realize that running the ball is what works. And I think last year towards the end of the year, like they won their last 6 games because they just kept running the ball. And I think Nav was saying earlier, he was saying he thinks it's just gonna be a continuation of last year into this year. I feel like that's really likely because like they're running the ball system, it works. And if it doesn't work, then they have their receivers. But once you have to combat those receivers too, they can't stack the box anymore. So that gives more running room for J.K. Dobbins.
I think we can just all agree right here that calling J.K. Dobbins a bust is probably the boldest take we have here. That's all.
Yeah.
All right, that's all we have for you today. Thanks for watching another video by Imagi Fantasy Football. Be sure to tune into our next video and to watch our mock draft that we did and our breakouts video that we uploaded both a few days ago. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.